It was the summer of 1940, and Britain was dying. German U-boats, the submarines of Nazi Germany, were sinking Allied ships faster than they could be built. Every night, ships carrying food, fuel, weapons, and supplies from America to Britain were being sent to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of sailors drowned in freezing waters. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, later wrote that the only thing that ever truly frightened him during the entire war was the threat of these U-boats. Without supplies, Britain would starve. Without weapons, Britain would fall. Without victory in the Atlantic, D-Day could never happen. The war would be lost. And then, a single invention changed everything. It was not a weapon. It was not a bomb. It was not a tank or a plane. It was a tiny device, no bigger than a light bulb, that could see the invisible. This invention broke the German U-boat threat, saved millions of lives, and paved the way for the liberation of Europe. This is the story of radar, the invention that won World War II. To understand why radar was so important, we must first understand the nightmare that was the Battle of the Atlantic. This battle lasted from 1939 to 1945, every single day of the war. It was the longest continuous military campaign of World War II. Germany knew that Britain was an island nation. Everything Britain needed to fight the war came by sea. Food, oil, steel, ammunition, and soldiers all had to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Germany's Admiral Karl Donitz had a terrifying plan. He would send hundreds of U-boats into the Atlantic to sink any ship heading toward Britain. These submarines would travel in packs called wolf packs, attacking convoys at night when they could not be seen. The numbers are staggering. During the war, German U-boats sank over 3,500 Allied ships. That is more than 14 million tons of shipping. Over 30,000 merchant sailors lost their lives. The waters of the Atlantic became graveyards. Ships were being sunk faster than American shipyards could build them. At the worst point of the battle, in 1942, German U-boats were sinking over 100 ships per month. Here is the terrifying reality. A convoy of 50 ships would leave New York or Halifax heading for Britain. They would sail in darkness, without lights, without radio signals, but the U-boats would be waiting. They would surface at night, invisible on the Black Ocean, and fire torpedoes into the helpless ships. Explosions would light up the sky. Ships would sink in minutes. Survivors would float in freezing water, many dying of hypothermia before rescue could arrive. The problem was simple. Allied ships and planes could not see the U-boats at night or in bad weather. They could not find the enemy before the enemy found them. Britain was losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and if Britain lost that battle, the war was over. Radar stands for radio detection and ranging. The idea was simple but revolutionary. If you send out a pulse of radio waves and those waves hit an object, like a submarine or an airplane, some of the waves will bounce back. By measuring how long it takes for the waves to return, you can determine exactly where the object is located. You can see the invisible. The development of radar did not begin with World War II. Scientists in several countries, including Germany, the United States, and Britain, had been experimenting with radio waves for years. But it was Britain that turned radar into a weapon. In 1935, a Scottish physicist named Robert Watson Watt was asked if it was possible to create a death ray that could stop enemy planes. He calculated that a death ray was impossible, but he told the British government something more valuable. He said, instead of destroying enemy planes, we can detect them before they even arrive. He demonstrated his idea by bouncing radio waves off a bomber flying 8 miles away. The British government was convinced. By 1939, Britain had the Chain Home radar system. This was a network of radar towers along the east and south coasts of England. These towers could detect German planes flying over the English Channel from France. When the Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940, radar gave British pilots early warning. They knew exactly where the German planes were coming from, how many there were, and how high they were flying. Without radar, the Royal Air Force would have been overwhelmed. With radar, they won the Battle of Britain. But the Battle of Britain was just the beginning. The real challenge was the Atlantic. How could you put radar on ships and planes to detect U-boats? The first radar systems used long waves, about 1.5 meters in length. These waves worked well for detecting large objects, like airplanes, but they could not detect small objects, like a submarine periscope of a submerged U-boat. And the antennas needed for long-wave radar were huge, too big to fit on an airplane. The solution was centimetric radar that used much shorter waves, only 10 centimeters in length. Shorter waves could detect smaller objects, including the periscope of a submerged U-boat, and the antennas could be small enough to fit under the nose of an airplane. There was one massive problem. No one had a device powerful enough to generate these short waves. The technology did not exist. Then came the invention that made centimetric radar possible. Two British physicists at the University of Birmingham, John Randall and Harry Boot, invented a device called the cavity magnetron. This small device, not much bigger than a fist, could generate powerful pulses of centimetric radio waves. It was, without exaggeration, one of the most important inventions of the 20th century. In September 1940, a British delegation traveled to the United States carrying a working cavity magnetron. They gave it to American scientists at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. The Americans were shocked. One American scientist called it the most valuable cargo ever brought to American shores. The British and Americans worked together to turn the cavity magnetron into working radar systems. The result was two revolutionary technologies. First, the air-to-surface vessel, or ASV radar, which could be mounted on patrol planes. These planes could now scan the ocean surface at night and in bad weather, detecting U-boats on the surface from miles away. Second, the microwave early warning radar, which could be mounted on ships to detect U-boats and incoming aircraft. By early 1943, the new radar systems were being deployed across the Atlantic. Allied patrol planes, equipped with ASV radar, could now find U-boats at night. Before radar, U-boats would surface at night to recharge their batteries and attack convoys, safe in the darkness. After radar, there was no safety. When a patrol plane detected a U-boat on its radar screen, it would fly toward the blip. The U-boat crew had no idea they had been detected. The plane would approach in complete darkness, then turn on a massive searchlight called a lee light, illuminating the U-boat below. The crew would be blinded and shocked. Then, the plane would drop depth charges or rockets. The results were devastating. In March 1943, German U-boats sank over 100 Allied ships. It was the worst month of the war. But in May 1944, the tide turned. The Allies sank 41 U-boats in a single month. So many German submarines were being destroyed that Admiral Donitz withdrew his U-boats from the North Atlantic. He could not afford to lose more. The technology kept improving. New radar systems could detect not just surfaced U-boats, but also their periscopes. Aircraft could now hunt submarines even when they tried to hide below the surface. The hunter had become the hunted. By 1944, the U-boat threat was largely neutralized. Supplies and troops could now cross the Atlantic safely. This made the D-Day invasion possible. On June 6, 1944, over 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy. They had the weapons, food, and fuel they needed because radar had kept the sea lanes open. Radar was not just winning the Battle of the Atlantic, it was being used in every theater of the war. In the Pacific, American ships used radar to detect incoming Japanese aircraft long before they arrived. During the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944, American radar gave commanders critical information about Japanese fleet movements. At night, when Japanese ships could not see their enemy, American ships with radar could see everything. They could fire their guns with deadly accuracy while remaining invisible. In Europe, radar was used to guide bombing raids. The British developed a radar system called oboe, which could guide bombers to their targets with incredible precision, even through clouds and darkness. Another system, called H2S, gave bombers a map-like picture of the ground below, allowing them to find targets even when they could not see the ground.
Radar was used for navigation, for weather observation, and for identifying friendly ships and planes. It was the silent eye that watched over every Allied operation. Here's an interesting question. If radar was so powerful, why didn't Germany develop it first? The answer reveals much about why the Allies won the war. Germany did have radar technology. German scientists had developed their own radar systems, including the Freya and Würzburg radars. But Germany made a critical mistake. They did not prioritize radar development. Hitler and the German High Command focused on offensive weapons, bombers, tanks, and submarines. Defensive technology, like radar, was seen as less important. By contrast, Britain understood from the beginning that radar was a war-winning technology. Churchill personally championed radar development. The British invested enormous resources into improving the technology.
Network and developing the cavity magnetron. There is also the story of German countermeasures. Germany developed detectors that could tell when a ship or plane was being painted by Allied radar. But the Allies responded by developing new radar frequencies that the German detectors could not pick up. It was a constant technological battle, and the Allies stayed one step ahead. By 1945, the Allies had radar on almost every ship, every plane, and every coastal defense station. The technology had become so advanced that Allied pilots could see enemy planes at night, through clouds, and over hundreds of miles. German U-boats could no longer surface anywhere in the Atlantic without being detected. The wolf packs were destroyed, the sea lanes were safe, and the invasion of Europe could proceed. The cavity magnetron, that small device invented by Randall and Boot, did not just win the Battle of the Atlantic, it changed the world. After the war, radar technology was adapted for civilian use. Air traffic control used radar to guide planes safely through the skies. Weather forecasters used radar to track storms and hurricanes. Ships used radar to navigate through fog and darkness. Police used radar to catch speeding cars. Every time you check a weather forecast, every time your flight lands safely in bad weather, every time a ship avoids a collision at sea, you are benefiting from the invention that helped win World War II. But the true legacy of radar is measured in lives saved. Before radar, the Battle of the Atlantic was a slaughter. Thousands of sailors died in freezing water, their ships sinking beneath them. After radar, the tide turned. The supplies got through. The soldiers arrived. The war was won. It is impossible to know exactly how many lives radar saved, but historians agree that without radar, Britain might have been forced to surrender. Without radar, D-Day could not have happened. Without radar, the world we live in today would be very different. So the next time someone asks what won World War II, they might say the atomic bomb. They might say the Sherman tank or the Spitfire fighter plane. They might say the courage of the soldiers or the genius of the generals. And all of those things mattered. But there is another answer, a quieter answer, an answer that fits in the palm of your hand. A tiny device that saw the invisible and saved the world. Radar, the invention that won World War II.